Greetings everyone and welcome. My name is Gwen Laster. I'm a violinist, composer, and teaching artist. Welcome to Composers Now. I'll start off and share about some of the music that I've composed over the years and give you a little background about my upbringing. I grew up in Detroit. My mother and my father were big, huge music lovers. My mother loving the blues, R&B, Motown, jazz. My father, a big jazz lover and music of 20th century modernist composers in the European classical genre. The music was playing all the time at my house, played endlessly on the record player. And I think this became the DNA of my musical inspiration, and it ignited my love for improvising, for playing violin, obviously, and for composing. So it was like the roots of my musical inspiration. I also had very forward-thinking progressive music educators, so my inspiration blossomed even more because of Detroit Public Schools and those educators that were there at that time that I grew up. I started typically in the 4th grade, twice a week ensemble classes in lower school in Detroit. By the time I got to middle school, my teacher, Jesse Verdon, was a jazz trumpet player. So it was the first time he had taught strings, and so he just utilized his background to create a really safe environment for us in the classroom. So we'd come in, we'd be playing piano, did a lot of playing piano by ear to kind of help me begin to learn my music theory. We sang, we played violin. And my high school was right across the football field from my middle school, so Jesse Verdon arranged for us to go and have orchestra rehearsals at the high school. So that opened my ears into the orchestral world of winds and brass and percussion alongside strings. Anderson White led the orchestra. He was a fierce forward thinker and jazz violist. So my first year at Northwestern High School in Detroit marked the inaugural year of it becoming a magnet fine arts school. So there was this fabulous new building less than a mile from the Motown recording studio. All this whole building that was built in the inner city was for the music department. We had new instruments, we had practice rooms, and we even had occasional visits and master classes from some of the musicians who worked at the Motown Museum. Some of them were part of the Funk Brothers. And this was just the perfect breeding ground for Andy White to diversify our skills. So I walked in orchestra one day and there were all these different color electric instruments, blue, green, red, amplifiers, and jazz string arrangements by David Baker. So we continued learning our traditional orchestra repertoire for the state competitions and all those things that schools did. But we also were responsible for learning the jazz arrangements. And Andy would call on any of us, particularly in the string section, and say, stand up, take a solo. So that was pretty frightening. But it was exciting to have this groove underneath me while I worked on kind of spontaneously creating melodies and rhythms and trying to develop my own sound. Andy White was also responsible for sending me to my first music sleepaway camps. He's also responsible for doing kind of upside down, flipped around music where we would play Baroque and classical on our electric violins and vice versa. He's also responsible for getting us booked on recording sessions in and around Detroit. And a few of those recording sessions gave me an opportunity to write string arrangements for some of the R&B singers around Detroit. So I remember, I remembered how the note for note music that I listened to growing up from my mother and father, of those lush string arrangements of singers like Dinah Washington and Nancy Wilson and the Temptations and Al Wilson and Curtis Mayfield, and all those kinds of people have a whole bunch of string arrangements. So I really remembered all that stuff. So that kind of led me into arranging, and it felt like I had a little help with my own ideas because there were already melodies, existing grooves and melodies already there. So it felt like a cool kind of a collaboration. So alongside my high school inspiration, were my peers. A good number of the peers, friends that I grew up with, they had their own bands, and there were original music bands, and they gigged around town. So I was gigging around town with my friends. I was playing original music that they had written, and it got me to thinking about, wow, that's really a cool idea to have your friends play your original music. So it developed my musical imagination, and it got my skills a little more in tune about the beginnings of music theory. And all the while doing that, in high school, I got hip to violin players like Jerry Goodman, like John Luponti, and I got hip to music of Michael Nerida Walden and Mandrill and Tower Power and Gentle Giant, Graham Central Station, and a whole bunch more. Edgar Winter, Frank Zappa. So we were just all over the place with all kinds of music, and I'm still doing orchestra music. Moving forward, I realized how important it was to actually have good facility on my instrument. I mean, I wasn't going to be able to execute any of my musical ideas that I imagined unless I could play them on my instrument, unless I could translate that to my instrument. So there was another orchestra that Andy White started outside of our Northwestern High School orchestra called the Detroit Community Orchestra. And that was in another neighborhood, and he invited students from different neighborhoods and different communities to play in that orchestra. And so I got additional orchestra training in that way. And there was also another orchestra in the neighborhood called the Highland Park Chamber Orchestra. So all these additional orchestras just kind of kept feeding into my imagination. So one of the professional musicians who used to come, Andy would have his peers, his colleagues come and sit in with us and sit in the section and, you know, help us to play through the music. One of those professionals that came was a violinist named Joe Striplin. And at the time, he was preparing for an audition for the Detroit Symphony. He's a violinist, great violinist from Detroit. And so Anderson White had us learn the accompaniment for the concerto that he was auditioning for so that he could come and practice with us for the audition. So he made the audition, and so Joe Striplin became the first Black in the Detroit Symphony and also my very first private violin teacher. After my audition and acceptance to the University of Michigan School of Music, I started developing and advancing my technique and learning all kinds of difficult repertoire in a private lesson setting and in the orchestra setting. But at the same time, I would go and play on the weekends in Detroit and play in the bands, various bands on the weekend. I searched out any violin player who played with a band and bought any vinyl with a violin player's name on it. If I didn't know their names, didn't matter. That was really good. So I found Zbigniew Seifert, Noel Pointer, Stefan Grappelli, Stuff Smith, Michael White, Ray Nance, Sven Nasmussen, and then I also met John Blake Jr. Playing with the McCoy Tyner Band. They happened to be coming through town in Ann Arbor playing. So I met him, and ever since I heard that violin player playing in that band, that was like I followed John Blake everywhere. I had so much respect for all these musicians. I mean, in addition to what I was hearing on recordings, I was also, still going back and forth and hanging out in Detroit and hearing the jazz musicians there. Marcus Belgrave, Donald Walden. I got a chance to play with Aretha Franklin, Barry Harris, and it was just so intriguing to me. And what I wanted to do was develop my imagination and my musical ideas, and I wanted to be able to execute them on the fly. So whatever I was thinking about, I wanted to be able to play it. That's the story of any creative musician, any improviser. They always want to work to do that. So I wanted to have a vocabulary of ideas that was appropriate to that particular genre of improvised music. And I always got way more support playing on the bandstand with these musicians and listeners. Even though I was working my way through playing changes and not that comfortable, but I kept going. I always got more support there than I actually did at the University of Michigan, playing in the orchestral environment. So that's when I realized how improvising is like spontaneous composing, and composing is developing something you're improvising on. At least that's the way I approach it sometimes. I figured if I could develop my improvising skills, I could compose enough to record my own album. My first 2 recordings were approached with me as the soloist, violinist, and with accompaniment, which was generally guitar or piano, bass, and drums. So that means that everybody had basically a lead sheet, a melody, chords, and then that way, any musician who got that music could interpret it however they wanted. And that's what I wanted at the moment. I wanted people to take what was there and develop it and help me to expand my imagination and kind of confirm that I just trusted people to take the music wherever it should go. So that was great. At some point, I decided that I wanted to, I would say I wanted to walk into the world of more specific music, or writing through composed parts, actually writing out more notes. So I had gotten a little bit of that experience of doing that, teaching young musicians at the Harlem School of the Arts. I would write arrangements for them. I would encourage them to write their own music, so I was arranging around their original thoughts, and I was writing specific parts, dealing with registers, dealing with harmonies, dealing with voicings. So that was a really good kind of an entree into my own work and my own desire to write more through composed music. So an opportunity came up where I could present a concert produce a concert of string quartet music. And it was subsidized, so that helped in terms of getting people and calling people that were available. And already on the program were string quartets of a couple of friends of mine. You know, we wanted to do, the whole idea was to do 21st century music and to also do music of composers of color. So I had this opportunity to do that, and I thought to myself, well, here's this chance for me to actually do some through composed music, to develop that skill, and to write for string quartet, because I hadn't written anything ever for string quartet. So the third recording that happened for me was called Blue Lotus, and it was actually that it was conceived by a cross section of events. First, me being driving and living in the Hudson Valley, upstate, being pulled over, searched, and my car towed, and all of this stuff, and I had no idea or reason why I was pulled over. That was never disclosed to me. I wasn't speeding or anything. So that happened, along with the Sandra Bland tragedy, which, of course, she was pulled over, and these things happened within a couple of months of each other. So that was like an eerie parallel for me, and it got inside me so deeply that I said, all right, I've got a string quartet desire to write this. I've got a concert coming up. I'm gonna write one movement. I'm gonna write something about this experience that happened to me and my feelings about the Sandra Bland tragedy. So the piece I composed for, inspired by that, is called Cigarette. And with grant support from Arts Mid Hudson, I was able to expand that idea and add 2 movements alongside Cigarette, and then that became the Black Lives Matter suite, based on such social injustices and current events. So here is a multimedia, meaning this piece has movement as well as music, as well as live music, a version of Cigarette, and we call it Sandy's Cigarette Dance. So the choreography is from Jamel Gaines at Creative Outlet, and the dancer is Naima Stewart. Please enjoy Sandy's Cigarette Dance. So what I'm discovering about my writing process is that I'm inspired by having a specific area of interest to compose from, be it writing, be it current events, be it artwork, visuals, video, or other artistic collaborations. The cigarette project, or the track Cigarette, that was inspired by the Sandra Bland tragedy, was written by me watching the video of the first arrest over and over and over. And these themes came to me that represented Sandra and her feelings, and these other themes came to me about the police officer. So I realized that that was a more direct or a more honest way to communicate for me, is to have really something specific to write about. So that helped me and wanted and encouraged me to have other musicians around, and to have other musicians to collaborate with, and other musicians to trust, and to give them specific music and then let them run with it. So that's like very empowering for me. From my ongoing interest in Eastern philosophy, reading, visuals, culinary arts, all that stuff, I stumbled upon Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. And I wondered if there were any writings out there that addressed the journey of African Americans. And so Clyde W. Ford's book, The Hero with an African Face, was just that. And so with funds awarded to me from New Music USA, I created the Cosmogram Project with 3 violins, electric bass, kora, and percussion. It's always been my dream to work with kora, always been my dream to compose with that. So that was like really cool for me. The piece is called Keepers of the Flame, and the music is based on a segment of Ford's book about the mythology of the Bulu people of Cameroon. So here is a listen to Keepers of the Flame. Please do keep an eye out for what's next, if you can. I'm hoping to keep in touch with you. I'm hoping that you're lining up all those comments there as you're looking at this, and I can keep in touch with you, but for anything that's upcoming. So what I have next coming up is look out for this ensemble named We Free Strings. Its next recording is coming out in 2023, and there's a version of Keepers of the Flame there for string quintet and drums. That same work will be reconfigured and released in 2023 as part of the Cosmogram project that will tie into the 25th celebration of Clyde W. Ford's book, The Hero with an African Face. There's new music and video coming from me through the Mutual Mentorship for Musicians Cohort 5, where I'm collaborating with Daphna Naftali. That'll be coming in June 2023, as well as new music and new recordings for new Muse Trio and a next version of Game Board. Thank you all for watching and listening. Gwen Laster signing out. Keep the faith.